Hey everyone, we just finished our desaturating with complementary colors practice, and again, just like when we did the color wheel, it wasn't really about what happened on the document. Then we did it again where we were working with the 5 steps plus white, then the 5 steps plus 100, 70, 50, 30, 0 grayscale. Here we did it with just the tints plus a hue. Then we desaturated with the complement. It's not just about making these documents. It's really more about like finding out what happens on your palette and how fun it is. Like you can see how that can create a full world on a painting. So we're gonna pivot and just do some playing. So I've got, similar to what we did with our achromatic studies, where we were practicing kind of figuring out what we could do with the paint and how to use the brushes or the palette knives or different tools. We're just going to use the paint that we have. If you know moving forward you have a painting that you want to make or a design project that is going to use a lot of this analogous scheme here, you can either choose to use those so that you can practice and see how they do, or you can save them for the painting that you've got coming up and use the colors that you don't think you're going to use. I'm going to start though with some of the ones that we already created, and I'm going to start a layered wash. We did this for the black and white, and I'm just going to flood it to start. I'm going to just wet the paper a little, and then I'm going to maybe take my just one of these that I have, and I'll just see what happens if I make it really washy. So more like a watercolor. I'm gonna add more water so it kind of floods. And then I'm gonna maybe get a different brush, have a little flat, and I'll see what happens if I'm not gonna go to red on this one because I don't want it to desaturate. I'm gonna see what happens if I use a blue violet. I'll try an analogous, we'll see what happens. So here's a big puddle. Kind of just rolling the paint, trying some different fun things. Maybe I'll add some straight white with a knife. You can see where the white is kind of creeping up in here. I think I'm going to add a little more green. I'll use my yellow green, mixing right into that white paint. And just like in our achromatic studies, you don't really want to overwork them too much because then they'll get too muddy. So I'm just going to leave it. Well, I'm going to add a little green at the bottom. And maybe a little at the top. So it's all kind of floating in this water. And I don't know what will happen to it when it dries. It'll do something different. This one says impasto, so we're gonna try and see what happens if we layer it on real thick. I'm gonna use a different kind of knife, this kind of wedge knife, and maybe I'll use my leftover pinks so that I can clean up this part of my palette. Scrape that up. Scrape some on. Maybe I'll shift to the lighter values. I'm gonna go into my red violet. Kind of layer, don't overwork it. And then maybe what I'll do is I'll take a different kind of brush. I have a number 10 flat, and I'm just gonna run some white at the top, real thick and chunky. Into it. kind of see how those are working. This one's still wet, so it's kind of rolling around and doing some different stuff. I'm gonna grab some more violet. So what I have here is a warm analogous palette. But again, if you keep working it, it'll start to get muddy. So this one says scumbling. That's where it's more like a dry brush kind of technique. So I'm gonna, what am I gonna use? I always like my flat shader. I'm gonna do that one again, dry it off. Maybe I'll use my oranges just to see kind of how they work. I think we had, on the earlier ones, we had talked about what would happen if I taped out these edges. They would look really resolved. I'm going to pivot to yellow. So I can make a kind of sunset-y kind of approach. I'll grab a little red. So I'm using the primaries and the secondaries, and I'm not using tints, tones, and shades here. But if I wanted to make it more complicated, I could add in a secondary or some of my desaturatieds and add in a little section that felt like the sunset kind of scene was changing. And it's scumbled in. I could totally pivot and try a different brush. I'm going to use my fan with a little white, and I did not get it wet. I could kind of cut that in a scumbly way on top. So these are really just to play, kind of try different things. And then this one said cross hatching, but again, you can kind of try anything you want here. And I might try a totally different color scheme. I'll maybe do a blue one and a violet, so blue analogous. So I'll do some blue violet. I'm running out of violet. Move into my red violet. I'll move into my red. I might see what happens if I wanted to put white on top of all of it. If I wanted to kind of soften it. So these are just like little playgrounds. And you have all this paint on your palette that you can either remake colors that you start to run out of, or you can start to build real paintings with them as you go. So these are just test grounds. And then like we did on these, if you want, you can come in with your Faber-Castell or felt tip markers, your gel pens, your Posca paint markers. We did that on this little study where we put the white marker and the black marker kind of working into these. You could also go back into some of these and try seeing what happens if you take some of your chromas, your mixes, and do what you call a glaze. So it's where the paint is thinned down and the old paint kind of shows through. So you still have that old value scale working under there, but you've essentially gone in and started to colorize the achromatic value scale. That's called underpainting. And if you like this stuff, then you should take my painting class with oil, and I can teach you how to really do cool stuff by layering color over achromatic spaces. Okay, so I'm gonna come back in one last video for color, and we're gonna make a sphere. Where did I put it? But with our color. So I'll be back in just a sec.